Two science fiction humorists have sold well in the mainstream, Douglas Adams and Kurt Vonnegut. Vonnegut's tales are laced with black humor and irony. Comedy meets tragedy, and they live pathetically ever after. So it goes. But the best-known piece of cosmic comedy is Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I mean, what can you say about a story that opens with the entire Earth being demolished to make way for an interstellar freeway? Hitchhikers is really a cult phenomenon. It started out as a radio play, and then it was adapted to record, to TV, a whole series of books. Douglas Adams, it's Commander Rick. Why isn't there more humor in science fiction?
I don't know. I mean, the problem is I'm not a great expert on science fiction. I mean, there is humour. I mean, the people who instantly leap to mind, obviously, are Kurt Vonnegut, of whom I'm an immense admirer, and Robert Sheckley, of whom I'm a great admirer of Sheckley, and he's one of the best sort of prose writers in science fiction. I think one of the reasons I'm not a great expert on science fiction is that I actually find there's a lot of not very good writing in science fiction. I mean, a lot of wonderful ideas, but not good writing. I mean, take a name off the top of the pack, Isaac Asimov, who has had some brilliant, astounding, extraordinary ideas. But his writing style, his prose style, is really not of the best. And I think that comedy writing tends to be is an extremely fine, difficult craft. And as somebody who has to do it myself, you always know if you meet another comedy writer who's actually managed to write something that's funny. You kind of know when you meet each other's eyes that, you know, we know how difficult that was. You know, these guys out there don't know that.
Yeah, but you know what they say, dying is easy, comedy is hard.
I actually find it immensely difficult to do, and it always... you never quite know how to react when people say, oh, that, you know, it's so easy to read, it sort of flows so smoothly, you must have had a ball writing it. And you think, well, it's nice that you think so on one level, because it means I've done my job properly. On the other hand, I wish you knew what had gone into it. I suppose the only thing I can say is that one sort of source of gratification, if you like, when you see people getting so much out of it, is that I actually know how much I put in.
The fan response to Hitchhiker's Guide has been unflagging. There's a bar in Ottawa named after your two-headed Playboy of the Galaxy, Zaphod Beeblebrox. I heard that Hitchhiker's Guide was even the subject of a British scholar's postgraduate paper in English Lit.
A number of people have pointed out that Hitchhiker is a picaresque novel. Basically, is a rather grand way of saying it's one damn thing after another. But it's also, you know, it sort of follows on a long tradition of the sort of the innocent abroad, the sort of stranger in a strange land, and this goes all the way back to sort of Pilgrim's Progress and the Everyman Plays, Gulliver's Travels, obviously. But one particular one, obviously, is Pilgrim's Progress. And Pilgrim's Progress was written by John Bunyan, who is an English Puritan. Now, there are certain books that we know John Bunyan read. Obviously, he read thousands of books in his life, but there are just a few that we happen to know he read because he made a diary entry and said, I read this book today. And one of them was a book by another English Puritan writer, and the book was called, and you'll see a slight similarity in the title, The Plain Man's Pathway to Heaven. And the name of the writer was Arthur Dent. And so when this guy discovered this, he thought, the whole thing is some wonderful sort of elaborate academic hoax. And as soon as he decided that, of course, he was able to find, you know, a ton of evidence in there, all sorts of sort of correlations between Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and The Plain Man's Pathway to Heaven. And he sifted all these out and wrote this sort of long paper on it and sent it to me. And I had to disappoint him because I'd never heard of this.
When you started out, one of your biggest influences was Monty Python's Flying Circus. How does what you do differ from what they did?
When they would do a sketch based on some sort of wild premise, it's a parody of the world, it isn't the real world. So there are no real consequences happening in this world. What I wanted to be able to do is take some absurd premise and say, this is actually happening. This is actually for real. Because it gives a sort of extra urgency, if you like, to the satire, which is at heart in many ways what it is. And if you're going to do that, then you almost instantly find yourself in the realm of science fiction. You know, because I mean, just going right from the beginning. Now you've got Arthur Dent lying in front of the bulldozer to protect his house that somebody wants to knock down, and then you suddenly, you know, pull back. You zoom back a long way, the next step up the scale, and the same thing's happening the other way up. And the role of Prosser, you know, the guy who on the one hand was saying, we've got to knock your house down, is now the guy saying, please don't knock my planet down. In order to sort of complete that joke, if you like, and say, and give it consequences and say it's real, well, the first thing you've done in this bloody story is you've destroyed the world. So you're kind of stuck with science fiction at that point, unless you're just going to play light music at the guys for the rest of the half hour, you know. So I mean, that's the thing. You're trying to take some absurd premise and say, this is real, this is real, this is urgent. And you can only do that in science fiction.
Thanks, Douglas. If science fiction can't take a joke a lot of the time, fantasy fiction is filled with laughter. Read anything by Terry Pratchett, including his new graphic novel, Eric. Josh Kirby did the artwork. P.G. Wodehouse meets Conan the Barbarian with a dash of Faulty Towers. I recommend everything and anything Pratchett's written. Other humorous fantasy includes Glenn Cook's In the Black Company about a private investigator named Garrett investigating murder and magic. And you know, Robert Howard's original Conan stories are laced with broad jokes and slapstick pie-in-your-face humor, the one thing that his imitators never seem to have understood. Nancy, any books you'd recommend? The best comedy is universal. Charlie Chaplin's silent movies needed no subtitles. Same with Sergio Aragonés' cartoons. His purely visual gags have filled the margins of Mad Magazine for decades. Sergio, it's Commander Rick. You started out reading comic books as a kid in Mexico. When did you start drawing cartoons?
I was always a cartoonist. There's no... I don't remember not drawing since I was a kid. The only difference is when you become a professional, the first time you get paid for one of your cartoons. That's when you realize that you are a professional. It's when somebody wants to buy them. But you draw them because you make your friends laugh and because they enjoy them and because it's a way of taking all your energies and your mind off. So you're writing and you're making drawings and you never write gags from the beginning. You always develop a sense of humor. You are not, I don't think you are born with a sense of humor, you develop it.
But how do you develop it? Where do all the gags come from?
The same place that poets get their rhymes and musicians get their notes. We have a whole pantheon of imagery and things and just pick them up, you know. They're there. You just go pick them up and put them there and use them.
Almost all cartoons are funny, and yet most comic books are so serious. One exception is your comic book, Gru, the world's worst swordsman. Why are there so few funny comic books?
The good humorists go to television because they get paid much better, or they do comic strips because they get much better paid. There's no money yet on comic books. So there's one of the reasons is that there's no any economic reward working for a comic book in humor. And a lot of people have to make a living. And I couldn't have done it ever if I didn't have the support of MAD, which was paying very good money for my cartoons. And also, humor is much more difficult to write as a very basic adventure plot, which has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that's it. You find a good villain, and then you have your good action thing. But humor, you have to have more complex situation. It's more to the point. You have to make people laugh, and it involves a lot. It's very complicated.